It's strange how one small town can look so peaceful at night. Streetlights hum quietly over empty sidewalks. The air smells like wet asphalt and pine trees after a late summer rain. Pinebrook, Illinois, the kind of place people move to because they think nothing bad ever happens here. But that illusion broke on a Wednesday morning in September, when a 20-year-old woman didn't come home. Her name was Haley Carter. Haley wasn't famous, or rich, or reckless. She was the kind of girl who baked cookies for her neighbors and helped her brothers with their homework. She had just gotten an interview for a teacher's aide position at Pinebrook Elementary, the same school she once attended. She was proud of that. Her friend said it made her feel like life was finally falling into place. But the thing about plans is that they rarely survive the night. Haley had turned 20 a few days earlier. Her best friend, Melissa Rhodes, insisted on a late birthday celebration. Nothing wild, just dinner, a concert, and maybe a drink afterward. Haley hesitated at first. It was the middle of the week, and she had that interview the next day. But Melissa's energy was contagious, and after a long talk, Haley smiled and said yes. "One night won't kill me," she joked. They didn't know those words would echo back in every headline for the next 2 years. The two friends drove into downtown Henderson, about 30 minutes away. The city pulsed with lights and laughter. The smell of street food and cheap perfume clung to the air. They saw a small rap show at a warehouse-style venue. Local artists, loud bass, bodies moving in sync. It was Haley's first concert in months, and for once, she allowed herself to be careless, singing along, laughing, letting go. At around 10 p.m., the show ended, but neither of them felt ready to head home. Melissa suggested they stop by Neon Haven, a nearby club with cheap vodka and even cheaper decisions. And that's where Derek Malone appeared. He was an old acquaintance from high school, friendly, confident, the kind of guy who always had a joke ready. Melissa remembered him from a few parties years ago. He seemed harmless. But that's what everyone says, until he's not. Inside the club, the air was thick with sweat and flashing lights. The three of them shared a booth, drinks, and stories that barely mattered. Haley wasn't much of a drinker, so she paced herself. Derek didn't. By the time the clock hit 2 a.m., he was slurring his words and stumbling toward the door, laughing like it was all just part of the fun. Melissa offered to order a rideshare for everyone, but Haley shook her head. "I'm fine," she said. "We'll crash at your place for a few hours." They did. At around 4 a.m., Haley changed out of her heels, grabbed her phone, and started heading out. Melissa, half asleep on the couch, looked up and said, "Stay, just sleep a few hours. You've got the interview at 2. But Haley smiled softly and said, "I want my own bed. Don't worry, Derek's walking me back." That was the last time Melissa ever saw her alive. The walk from Melissa's apartment to Haley's house was barely a mile. Pinebrook streets were quiet, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. What happened in that space between the apartment and home is something no one saw, except two people. And one of them didn't live to tell it. At 9 a.m., Melissa texted Haley, "Did you make it back okay?" No reply. She sent another an hour later. Still nothing. By early afternoon, Haley had missed her interview. That's when the panic began to set in. Her parents, Karen and Michael Carter, tried calling, straight to voicemail. They thought maybe her phone died, or she overslept. But Haley wasn't the kind of person who went silent. By 5 p.m., they called the police. The Pinebrook Police Department filed a missing person report within the hour. Small-town cops don't usually move that fast, but something about the mother's voice, trembling, desperate, made them act. Detective Sara Delgado was assigned to the case that same evening. She'd seen too many missing young women over the years. And she knew, statistically, that after the first 24 hours, the odds of finding them alive dropped sharply. Delgado started simple, retraced the timeline. Last seen, around 4 a.m. Last person with her, Derek Malone. When officers knocked on Derek's door, he opened it shirtless, groggy, and visibly hungover. He said he'd walked Haley most of the way home before turning back because he felt sick. He pointed vaguely toward a payphone near the intersection of Birch Avenue and 8th. At first, it sounded plausible. But when Detective Delgado asked him to repeat the story, the small cracks began to show. "Which way did she walk after you left?" I think she went straight." "You think? Or you saw?" I'm not sure. It was dark." Then came the question that made him hesitate. "Can we take a look at your phone?" He froze for a second too long, then shrugged and handed it over. The screen locked. He gave a passcode. It was wrong. Meanwhile, volunteers and neighbors had already started searching the town. Wooded areas, creeks, parks. Pinebrook isn't big, but it's full of places you could disappear into. Around 9 p.m., a sharp scream tore through the quiet. A searcher named Jason Rowe, Haley's uncle, had spotted something near the stream in Pinebrook Park, a patch of fabric half buried under leaves and branches. It was Haley. Face down, motionless, clothes disheveled. A shallow stream flowed past her, the water catching strands of her hair. The search stopped. The world, for a moment, went still. By midnight, the park was sealed off. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind. Forensic lights cast eerie glows across the trees. Detective Delgado watched quietly as the coroner's van pulled away. She'd seen hundreds of cases, but this one, the detail, the smallness of the town, the family watching from behind the barrier, it hit differently. Autopsy results would come back within 24 hours. But Delgado already knew what she was going to find. Back at the station, Derek sat in an interview room, pale, twitching, defensive. He stuck to his story. He walked Haley halfway home, stopped to puke, turned back, and never saw her again. But his phone records told another version. Between 4:28 and 4:52 a.m., his phone went dark, no signal, no movement. When it reconnected, the GPS pinged exactly at the border of Pinebrook Park. 4:52 a.m. That timestamp would become the backbone of the entire investigation, the single piece of digital truth that tore apart every lie he'd tell. Outside the police station, the first reporters were already gathering. A missing person case had turned into a homicide. And in a town like Pinebrook, everyone knew everyone. For Haley's parents, the waiting had turned into mourning. For Detective Delgado, the case had just begun. And for Derek Malone, 4:52 a.m. was about to haunt him for the rest of his life. They say every lie has a pulse. Sometimes it's faint, hidden under nerves, excuses, and silence. But once you start listening closely, you can hear it. Detective Sara Delgado had been doing this long enough to recognize that rhythm. And Derek Malone's story? It was beating off tempo from the very first word. The morning after Haley Carter's body was found, the forensics unit moved through Pinebrook Park like surgeons in slow motion, marking footprints, collecting fibers, scanning every inch of damp soil before the rain could erase it. A pale mist hovered above the water where she had been found, still carrying the faint smell of pine and decay. At the station, Delgado stood over a board filled with photos. Haley's smile, the stream, the payphone near Birch Avenue, and that haunting timestamp glowing on a phone record, 4:52 a.m. She traced the line connecting them with a marker, then underlined it twice. That minute would decide everything. Derek Malone sat in an interview room across the hall. No handcuffs, not yet, just a cup of black coffee, his hands trembling slightly as he held it. He still wasn't officially under arrest. But the detectives knew. Men who are innocent don't keep changing the little things in their story. "Let's go over this one more time," Delgado said, sitting across from him, calm, almost gentle. He nodded, exhaling hard. "I walked her home. We stopped near the phone booth. She said she'd be fine. I turned back." Delgado leaned forward. "And what time was that?" He hesitated. "Maybe 4:30. I didn't check." Her pen tapped the table twice, steady, rhythmic. "Your phone went dark at 4:28, Derek. No calls, no GPS, nothing until 4:52. When it pinged right here," she pointed to the map, the edge of Pinebrook Park. His jaw clenched. "My phone died." "Phones don't die and resurrect 24 minutes later in a different location," she said quietly. For the first time, he looked away. By evening, the lab sent back the first batch of results. A makeup smudge on Derek's jacket matched the same brand Haley used, a faint mauve lipstick shade found on her phone case. Fibers from her sweater clung to the jacket sleeve. And under her nails, technicians found minute traces of skin DNA, consistent with defensive scratching. It wasn't enough for a conviction, but it was enough to break the story he'd been trying to hold together. Detective Delgado returned to the interview room with the evidence folder. Derek looked exhausted now, eyes bloodshot, hands restless, knee bouncing under the table. He glanced at the folder like it might explode. "I told you what happened," he muttered. Delgado slid a photo across the table, a zoomed-in shot of a scrape on his neck. You didn't mention this. He touched it instinctively. That. From shaving. She said nothing, just placed another photo beside it, Haley's fingernails under UV light, faint streaks of blood visible. The silence stretched until he finally spoke again. She fell, he said quickly. We were fooling around. She wanted a piggyback ride or something, and she fell. Hit her head. Delgado didn't flinch. Autopsy shows no head injury. He blinked, mouth half open. Then maybe she passed out. I tried to wake her up. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. She watched him scramble for footing, lie stacking on lie like a collapsing tower. What did you do next, Derek? I hid her. I didn't want people thinking I did something. But you did hide her, Delgado said. Under branches, near the creek. That's not panic. That's intent. The room fell still except for the hum of the overhead light. He looked smaller now, a young man shrinking into his chair, trapped in the shadow of what he'd done. Outside, rain started to fall, soft, persistent, like the town itself was listening. Delgado stepped out of the interview room and closed the door behind her. Her partner, Detective Reed Hollis, leaned against the wall with crossed arms. You think he's gonna crack? Hollis asked. He already has, she replied. He just doesn't know it yet. That night, Delgado drove to the Carter home to speak with Haley's parents. The lights were on, but the house felt cold. A casserole sat untouched on the table, and the faint sound of a news anchor echoed from a muted TV. Karen Carter met her at the door. Her eyes were swollen, voice barely above a whisper. Did she suffer? Delgado hesitated. She hated this part more than anything. We don't think it was long, she said softly. Karen nodded, though her shoulders trembled. Her husband, Michael, stood behind her, silent, gripping the edge of the doorframe until his knuckles turned white. Delgado promised them answers. And for once, she meant it. By the end of the week, new information arrived. CCTV footage from a local gas station near Pinebrook Park. At exactly 4:55 a.m., the camera caught a blurry figure sprinting across the frame. Tall, male, wearing a bomber jacket. Police enhanced the image. It wasn't perfect, but the outline matched Derek Malone down to the way he carried his shoulders slightly uneven. Then came the clincher, a bank card, found just feet away from where Haley's body had been discovered. Name printed clearly, Derek Malone. When Delgado confronted him again, he tried another version. She wanted it, he said. We kissed, she was into it. I didn't mean for anything bad to happen. Delgado's voice stayed even. You're saying she consented? Yes. It was an accident. I swear. She opened the autopsy file and read aloud. Multiple bruises around the neck, consistent with manual strangulation. Defensive injuries on the forearms. No trace of consensual activity. Derek swallowed hard. I didn't know. Yes, you did, she said. Because she told you to stop. And you didn't. Hours later, after a long silence and the sound of rain hitting the windows, Derek's voice finally cracked. She was yelling, he whispered. I tried to calm her down. She kept fighting me. And then? I don't know, he said, tears welling now. It happened fast. She stopped moving. Delgado stared at him, her face unreadable. You put her in the creek, covered her with branches, and went home. You didn't call for help. You didn't tell anyone. He looked down at his hands. I was scared. She stood up, gathering her notes. You should be. By morning, the warrant was signed. Derek Malone was officially charged with murder and sexual assault. The story broke across Illinois within hours. Small-town girl killed by childhood friend. Reporters camped outside the Carter family home. People from Pinebrook left flowers and candles near the park's entrance. But for Detective Delgado, it wasn't over. Because every case has a second story, the one that comes after the headlines fade. In the days that followed, more women came forward, each with a similar story. They had known Derek. They had trusted him. And they had been too ashamed or too afraid to speak before. Their voices gave the case new weight, turning one tragedy into a movement for change. Delgado stayed late one night at a desk, the evidence board glowing under a single lamp. She looked at Haley's photo, that easy, unguarded smile. In a town that thought it was safe, she'd trusted someone who wasn't. Delgado picked up a pen and wrote the final word beneath the 4:52 a.m. line on her board. Justice. Every case ends the same way. A room, a verdict, a silence. But what happens inside that silence stays with you. For Detective Sara Delgado, Pinebrook had stopped feeling like a small town long ago. Now, it was a courtroom under fluorescent light, a crowd of strangers pretending to breathe normally, and one man in a grey suit sitting where justice keeps its distance, Derek Malone. It had been 9 months since the night Haley Carter didn't make it home. In that time, Pinebrook learned to pronounce words it never had to before: forensic, autopsy, strangulation. The town's innocence had been itemized, logged, and sealed in evidence bags. Derek's trial began on a rainy Monday morning. Outside the courthouse, candles still burned beside framed pictures of Haley's smile. Inside, the gallery filled with reporters, family, and a few of Derek's old classmates who still couldn't believe that the kid who fixed their bikes had become a headline. Delgado took a seat quietly near the back. She wasn't there for the cameras. She was there because she'd promised Karen Carter she would stay until the very end. When Derek entered, his eyes stayed low. The bright orange jumpsuit had been replaced with a pressed grey suit, but nothing could smooth the guilt that clung to him. His lawyer whispered something about composure, but his hands never stopped shaking. The prosecutor, a calm woman named Elaine Porter, opened with a single sentence that cut through the air. At 4:52 a.m., the truth began recording itself, and it hasn't stopped since. Over the next 2 weeks, the jury listened to every minute of that truth. They saw GPS logs, security footage, text messages, and the evidence Delgado's team had pieced together inch by inch. The timeline was now a blade. 4:03 a.m., Haley leaves her friend's apartment. 4:28 a.m. Derek's phone goes dark. 4:52 a.m. ping near Pinebrook Park. 9:02 p.m. her body found beneath the branches. Every witness, every expert, every photograph told the same story. She trusted him, and he used that trust as a weapon. When the medical examiner took the stand, the courtroom fell into that peculiar stillness reserved for moments people wish they could skip. Dr. Henderson spoke carefully, clinically. No blunt trauma, no accident. Cause of death, manual strangulation. Estimated time, approximately 4:45 to 4:50 a.m. Someone in the gallery sobbed quietly. Karen Carter's hand trembled against her husband's sleeve, and Delgado felt the ache travel through her own chest like static. The defense tried to rewrite the story. They argued Derek had been confused, that Haley's death was an accident during intimacy. It was a line the world had heard before, the rough sex defense, the last refuge for men who didn't stop when someone said no. But then Porter stood, calm and sharp. She clicked the remote. The projector flickered to life, showing a still frame, Derek's bank card, lying in the mud beside the creek. He wasn't confused when he hit her. He wasn't confused when he deleted messages. Confusion doesn't cover a body with branches. That's not confusion. That's calculation. You could almost hear the sound of the defense shattering. When Detective Delgado was called to testify, she kept her answers factual. No dramatics, no speculation. But her voice, steady as it was, carried something the jury felt more than heard. Haley Carter trusted him, she said. She believed she was safe walking beside him. The evidence shows she was wrong, and that trust cost her life. Derek stared at her, expression blank, but his jaw trembled slightly. Delgado didn't look away. During the recess, rain tapped softly against the courthouse windows. Outside, Pinebrook residents gathered under umbrellas, quiet, respectful, holding signs that read justice for Haley. They didn't chant. They just waited. Small towns grieve differently, through silence that lasts longer than noise. On the 10th day of the trial, 3 women were called to the stand. Each had known Derek. Each told stories of coercion, fear, silence. None of them had spoken before Haley's death. Their testimonies turned the courtroom into a collective breath hold. It wasn't just about one night anymore. It was about a pattern, a series of ignored warnings now echoing through every sentence. When they finished, even the judge looked tired, as if the weight of the truth had pressed itself against everyone's ribs. The defense rested with a final plea for leniency. Derek's lawyer argued that his client was young, remorseful, capable of rehabilitation. But remorse, Delgado thought, doesn't come 9 months late and only when you're cornered. When Derek finally spoke, his voice cracked, not from grief, but self-pity. "I never meant for it to happen," he said. "It's ruined my life too." The jury's faces didn't change. Karen Carter's did. She turned away, whispering something no one heard except her husband. After 5 hours of deliberation, the verdict returned. The bailiff called for order. The air grew heavy again. On the charge of first-degree murder, the foreperson read, "We find the defendant guilty." No cheers, no shouts. Just the sound of Karen Carter quietly crying into her hands, and Delgado exhaling for what felt like the first time in months. The judge's gavel struck once. Life sentence. Minimum 29 years before parole. Outside, thunder rolled across Pinebrook. Some said it sounded like closure. Delgado wasn't sure such a thing existed. In the weeks that followed, the town tried to stitch itself back together. The flowers at the park turned to wilted stems. The candles melted into puddles of wax. But the name Haley Carter stayed on people's lips. At church, in classrooms, in whispered warnings parents gave their daughters. A few months later, Congress passed a bill strengthening laws against consent as defense claims in homicide cases. Haley's case was cited during the hearings. Her mother attended one session in Springfield, sitting silently as lawmakers quoted her daughter's name, not as tragedy, but as change. Delgado watched the footage later that night from her office, the flicker of the monitor lighting her tired eyes. She smiled, faintly. It wasn't joy, it was acknowledgement. Haley Carter, the quiet girl from a small Illinois town, had moved mountains after all. Sometimes, Delgado revisited the park. Not out of guilt, but because every investigator needs to remember why they started. She would stand near the creek, where the light filtered through the trees just right, and listen to the faint sound of water moving over stones. The bench nearby carried a small brass plaque now. In memory of Haley Carter, her light still guides home. Families left flowers there. Teenagers came to sit in silence. Even the air seemed softer. On the anniversary of the verdict, Delgado met with Melissa Rhodes, Haley's best friend. They sat at a diner off Main Street, the same booth where Haley once liked to order milkshakes. Melissa brought a photo, Haley smiling at a birthday dinner, the candlelight catching her eyes. She looked alive in a way that almost hurt. "I still check my phone sometimes," Melissa said, half expecting a text. "Isn't that crazy?" Delgado shook her head. "No. That's love refusing to forget." They sat in silence, the clatter of dishes filling the space between grief and gratitude. That night, back at her office, Delgado reopened the old case file. She didn't need to. It was closed, the evidence stored, the paperwork done. But some part of her couldn't let it end on a shelf. Pinned in the center of the board was the photo she'd kept since the beginning. Haley's smile under golden light. Around it were the remnants of the storm, timestamps, maps, the number 452 written in red. Delgado took a pen and drew one final line beneath it. Not a note, not a case number. Just a word, remember. Because in the end, that's all justice ever is. Not forgetting. There's a saying among detectives, when the trial ends, the real noise begins. The verdict may silence the courtroom, but the echoes linger, in files, in memories, in dreams. For Detective Sara Delgado, those echoes had faces, names, and timestamps that refused to fade. Even after the cameras left Pinebrook, the story kept breathing, not in headlines, but in the quiet lives left behind. It had been nearly a year since the verdict in the People vs. Derek Malone. Haley Carter's photo still hung above Delgado's desk, the same one from the caseboard, the edges curled from time. Next to it, pinned with care, was a printed screenshot. 4:52 a.m. Pinebrook Park GPS signal. The moment truth started whispering. Sometimes, Delgado would look at that screen and think, what if she'd been wrong? Not about the verdict, but about what justice really fixed. Because for every solved case, there's something that stays unsolved, the people. The Carters had moved out of Pinebrook 3 months after the sentencing. Their new home was only 40 miles away, but it might as well have been a world apart. They didn't sell the old house. They couldn't. It still smelled faintly like Haley's perfume, her notebook stacked neatly in the corner of her room. Karen wrote Delgado once a month, short, neat handwriting on cream paper. Sometimes it was about the new memorial garden being built near the old park. Other times, it was just a thank you. No questions, no demands. Just gratitude in its purest form. One line from her last letter stuck in Delgado's head. Justice doesn't bring peace, Sara, but it stops the bleeding long enough for healing to start. Pinebrook itself had changed too. The park where Hayley's body was found had become a small memorial site, clean, open, filled with wildflowers. Students visited every spring. Some left flowers, others left folded notes that read you mattered. The town's high school even started a scholarship in Hayley's name, for students pursuing criminal justice or forensic studies. It was the kind of full circle only tragedy can draw. Something breaks so others can learn where the cracks are. But even as Pinebrook tried to rebuild, the ghosts found new places to haunt. Delgado's department was short-staffed, overworked, and burdened with more cases than it could handle. And yet, sometimes at night, when everyone else had gone home, she'd sit in the evidence room under a single buzzing light, staring at old files. Not just Hayley's, but others. Cases that went cold. Faces of women who never got their 452 signal. One evening, while reviewing archive data, Delgado noticed something odd. A small folder in the system labeled Unlinked Evidence, 2018. She opened it casually, expecting a misfiled report. Inside was a series of audio logs, anonymous calls, never matched to a case. One of them, dated April 12, 2018, caught her attention. The voice was distorted, panicked, but there was a name that cut through the static. He said his name was Derek. He won't stop following me. Delgado froze. 2 years before Hayley's murder. Same voice pattern. Same region. The woman who made the call was never identified. The audio ended abruptly, mid-sentence, mid-breath. For a long moment, Delgado sat in silence. Her heart wasn't racing. She'd seen too much for that. But her mind spun with a quiet fury that only comes when you realize how early a tragedy could have been stopped. She wrote a note in her file, possible prior victim connection, uninvestigated lead, 2018. Then she shut off the computer and stared at the empty room. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound. Even justice has blind spots, she thought. Sometimes, it doesn't arrive at 4:52. Sometimes, it misses the call completely. Weeks passed. Delgado met with her captain, proposed a review of cold cases involving women under 25 in the region between 2017 and 2019. It wasn't glamorous work, no cameras, no trials, just long nights, faded paperwork, and digital dust. But she did it anyway. Because behind every case-closed stamp, there's a story that didn't get told. And if Hayley's legacy meant anything, it was this: truth doesn't stop when the file closes. One rainy evening, Delgado visited Hayley's memorial bench. The same one near the creek, engraved with brass letters that caught the light whenever the sun dared to break through. Someone had left a small teal ribbon tied around the bench arm, Pinebrook High's color. She sat there for a while, listening to the gentle trickle of water below. Her reflection rippled across the creek, fractured, uncertain, human. She thought about the hundreds of detectives like her across the country, sitting in rooms like this, searching for something they might never find. It wasn't glory. It wasn't closure. It was a kind of duty that bordered on obsession. And yet, she wouldn't trade it. Because in a world built on lies, someone has to stay awake at 4:52. The next morning, Delgado received a voicemail from Melissa Rhodes, Hayley's best friend. She sounded nervous but determined. Detective. I don't know if this matters, but I think I saw someone at the park last night. He was standing by the bench, just staring. Didn't say anything. Just there. I called out, and he left. But it didn't feel right. Delgado replayed it twice. The rational part of her said it was nothing. Grief can make ghosts out of shadows. But the detective in her didn't believe in coincidences. She drove to the park at dawn. The fog was thick, swallowing the trees in pale white mist. When she reached the bench, it was empty, but there, resting on the seat, was a single red carnation, perfectly fresh. No note. No footprints. Just the flower, glistening with dew. Back in her car, Delgado stared at it through the windshield. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't even a threat. But it was a reminder. Some stories don't end when the sentence does. They just change chapters. Maybe someone wanted to honor Hayley. Or maybe someone wanted to make sure she wasn't forgotten, in their own, twisted way. Either way, the echo was still alive. That night, Delgado sat in her apartment with the city lights bleeding through the blinds. She poured herself a cup of coffee, the kind that had gone cold before she even took a sip. On her table lay a small collection, Haley's photo, the red carnation, and a copy of the Domestic Justice Act passed last year, the law inspired partly by the case. She traced her finger along the headline. New legal protections for victims of non-consensual harm in fatal cases. Haley's name wasn't in bold. It wasn't meant to be. But Delgado knew. It was there, between the lines. She'd become part of a system that had learned something the hardest way possible. As the night deepened, the city quieted. Somewhere, a train passed, its whistle echoing through the distance like a memory. Delgado leaned back, eyes half closed. Justice isn't about winning, she whispered to herself. It's about remembering. She opened her notebook, wrote 3 words beneath the date. Keep listening. Always. Then she turned off the lamp. There's a moment after every solved case when you start to breathe again, or at least pretend to. You tell yourself the noise has stopped, the ghosts are gone, and what's left is just paperwork and silence. But sometimes, silence isn't peace. It's preparation. For Detective Sara Delgado, peace lasted exactly 3 weeks. It started with a voicemail. Unknown number. Timestamp. 4:52 a.m. The voice was shaky, low, distorted, almost like someone whispering into a paper cup. You never really stopped it, did you? Then static. Then nothing. Delgado replayed it 3 times. No caller ID. No trace. But the time, 4:52, hit her like a ghost slamming a door. The same minute Haley Carter's phone last pinged before she died. Coincidence? Maybe. But in Pinebrook, coincidences had a way of growing teeth. She reported it. Her captain brushed it off. Cranks. Happens every time a case goes public, he said. But Delgado couldn't shake it. The voice wasn't threatening, it was knowing. And that was worse. That morning, she drove to the old park, Haley's Park. The memorial bench glowed faintly under morning light. The red carnation she'd seen weeks before was gone. In its place, a folded note sealed inside a plastic bag, pinned under a pebble. Inside, written in clean, uneven handwriting. She wasn't the first. The air froze around her. Delgado stood there, note trembling between her fingers, every instinct pulling her 2 ways, part of her saying don't do this again, and the rest whispering you have to. She sent the note to the lab that afternoon. Handwriting, DNA, the works. The text would take a week, maybe 2. In the meantime, she reopened her old cold case folder labeled Unlinked Evidence, 2018. That anonymous call she'd found months ago, the one mentioning Derek, suddenly didn't feel like a footnote. It felt like a beginning. The next few days blurred into late nights and half-drunk coffee cups. Delgado listened to the old tape again and again. The voice wasn't Haley's. It was older, maybe mid-20s, and scared, the kind of fear that sits behind the throat, too tired to scream. She enhanced the audio through the lab software. Under the distortion, there was something faint, the sound of a train horn, distant but clear. That detail sparked a memory. Pinebrook's train depot, 10 miles south of town. Back in 2018, it had been abandoned, a known hangout for kids, drifters, and sometimes people who didn't want to be found. Delgado drove there the next morning. The depot was still standing, broken glass, graffiti, the faint hum of wind slipping through hollow walls. She walked the perimeter with her flashlight, careful where she stepped. The wood creaked like old bones. Near one corner, behind a rusted vending machine, she noticed something, faint scratch marks on the brick wall, like initials carved years ago. L+D, 2018. She took a picture. The carving didn't mean much by itself, but to her, it felt like a whisper. Another breadcrumb left behind by someone who wanted to be remembered. And that's when she saw it, half buried in dirt beside the wall, a small silver pendant, shaped like a crescent moon. She pocketed it carefully, tagged it later as found object, possible victim number 2. Back at headquarters, the lab report came in. The handwriting from the park note didn't match anyone in the system. But the ink, an imported brand used mostly in stationery shops in Riverbend, a small town 60 miles north. Riverbend. Population 5,000. One of the towns Derek Malone had briefly lived in during 2018 before moving to Pinebrook. The signal was coming from the past again, loud and clear. Delgado took a leave day. Drove to Riverbend herself. It was a quiet town, too quiet. Main Street looked like time had pressed pause. An old diner, a hardware store, and a shuttered boutique called Moonlight Stationery. The name tugged at her. Inside the boarded-up shop, the dust was thick enough to taste. Old receipts lay scattered across the counter, some dated 2018. And one name appeared twice in the customer log, L. Dawson. She ran it through the database back in her car. Lydia Dawson. Reported missing, April 15, 2018. Last seen leaving a house party near the Riverbend train depot. The case went cold within weeks. No suspects. No body. No justice. Delgado gripped the steering wheel tight. Lydia Dawson. The same initials on the wall, L+D. The same year. And the same ghost name in that old audio call. Derek Malone hadn't just killed Haley. He'd started long before her. That night, Delgado sat in her motel room, staring at the moon pendant she'd found. Her phone buzzed once. Unknown number again. Voicemail. Timestamp. 4:52 a.m. She didn't even need to listen. She knew it would be static, breathing, maybe a whisper, a haunting echo that the past still had more to say. When she finally pressed play, the voice was faint, but this time, it wasn't just static. You found me. Morning came grey and cold. Delgado drove back to Pinebrook, parked near the park bench again. The air smelled of rain. She sat there for a long while, thinking about Lydia, Haley, and all the names that never made the news. The red carnation she'd placed weeks ago had wilted. She replaced it with the silver pendant, hanging it gently from the edge of the plaque. You're seen now, she whispered. Behind her, the sky began to brighten, that soft, uncertain light that comes before sunrise. And in that moment, something clicked, a strange piece that didn't erase the pain but made it make sense. The signal, she realized, wasn't just a timestamp. It was a cycle, the moment truth demands to be heard again, no matter how much time passes. Back at her desk later that day, Delgado filed a new report. Case title, The Pinebrook Case, Extended Investigation. Subject, Unlinked Victim, Lydia Dawson, 2018. Status, Ongoing. She added one final note at the bottom, handwritten in blue ink. When the signal returns, listen. Then she shut the file. That night, she sat by her window as rain streaked across the glass. The reflection of the city lights shimmered like the creek back in Pinebrook. Her phone rested on the table, screen dark, but she kept glancing at it anyway, waiting, half afraid, half ready. When it finally buzzed again, she didn't flinch. Timestamp. 4:52 a.m. A soft, single vibration, then silence. She smiled faintly. Because some echoes don't haunt. They guide. They say when you stare at the past too long, it starts staring back. I used to think that was just something old cops said to scare rookies. But lately, every time the clock hits 4:52 a.m., I start to wonder who's really watching who. The silver pendant had changed everything. It wasn't just a forgotten trinket. It was proof that Haley Carter hadn't been Derek Malone's first victim. The initials carved into the wall, L+D, 2018, weren't love, they were a record. And Lydia Dawson was the missing half of that record. The voice on the old tape still haunted me. He said his name was Derek, he won't stop following me. That was 2018. But something about the voice didn't sit right. It wasn't just fear, there was recognition in it, as if the caller knew exactly what she was walking into. The Riverbend station kept drawing me back. Every creak of its wood, every echo under its beams, felt like it was whispering a name. But not Derek's. Someone else's. When I revisited the site a few nights later, the air was colder, sharper. It had just rained, and water pooled beneath the old vending machine where I'd found the pendant. Something metallic caught the reflection. A bent key, half buried in the mud, stamped with the number 22B. It didn't belong to the station. I'd checked its old locker registry. Whatever it opened was somewhere else. The next morning, I took the key to forensics. They cleaned it, scanned it, and matched it to a storage facility in Riverbend. Unit 22B, registered under a name that stopped my breath for half a second. Lewis Dalton. Lewis. L+D. Not Lydia Dawson. Lewis Dalton. Derek had never carved a memorial. He'd carved a warning. Dalton. That name wasn't new. He'd surfaced once, briefly, in the early witness reports, a co-worker of Derek's at a local car garage. Dismissed as irrelevant. Moved away in 2019. But the file said something else too. No forwarding address, no contact record, no trace. Until now. The Riverbend storage complex was 10 minutes off the main highway. Row after row of steel doors under flickering floodlights. I arrived close to midnight. The place looked empty, except for the hum of power lines overhead. When I found Unit 22B, my pulse slowed to a crawl. The lock was already broken. Someone had been here before me. Inside, the air smelled like rust and rain. A single hanging bulb swung overhead, flickering. Boxes lined the walls. No labels, no order. In the corner, an old police scanner hissed faint static. And then I saw it, an audio recorder, identical to the one used in the 2018 distress call. Next to it lay a stack of tapes, each labeled with dates, April 2018, July 2019, September 2019. The last one read simply, Haley. I hit play. Static. Then breathing. Then a male voice, low, careful, calm. She trusted him. They always trust him first. Not Derek's voice. Someone else's. Dalton. My throat went dry as he continued. He takes them. I watch. Someone has to remember what he does. One day, they'll blame me too. But I'm not like him. The recording stopped abruptly, mid-breath. It didn't make sense. Was Dalton an accomplice, or a witness too scared to come forward? Or worse, was he the one who taught Derek how to kill? The next few days blurred into paperwork, calls, dead ends. Dalton had left a thin trail, burner phones, fake IDs, old motel receipts under aliases like Luke Daniels and Lee D. Everywhere he went, Derek had been there months later. The same towns. The same pattern. Almost like they were chasing each other. At night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that carving again, L+D, 2018. The symmetry of it. Like it meant something more than initials. Like it was a code. I went back through the audio again. At the 37-second mark, under Dalton's breathing, a faint sound emerged. Train wheels, moving slowly, fading out. And then, right before the tape cut, a muffled whisper. Check the map. It's still there. I didn't know what that meant, until I remembered something in the old Pinebrook archives. A decommissioned rail line running from Riverbend to Pinebrook Park, used decades ago before it was shut down. The line had been buried, paved over when the new highway opened. But maybe not completely. 2 days later, I brought a ground team with a drone and scanner unit. We traced the old route, through farmland, woods, and the outskirts of Pinebrook. Halfway through the scan, the technician froze. He said, pointing to the monitor. Metal readings. Buried objects. About 8 feet deep. We marked the coordinates, dug carefully. The smell hit before the site did. Old earth and decay. Inside the shallow pit, a rusted metal crate, sealed shut with bolts. We opened it slowly. Inside were tapes, photos, and fragments of jewelry, dozens of them. Some tagged with names I'd never heard. Others, blank. At the bottom, a single item lay untouched, a digital watch, stopped at 4:52. The next few weeks were chaos. Evidence teams poured in. DNA confirmed at least 3 victims predating Haley and Lydia. The press called it the signal burial site. But Dalton was gone. No trace. No body. Nothing. Every path led back to one conclusion. Derek Malone hadn't worked alone. And whoever the man in the signal was, he was still out there, listening. Back at headquarters, I played the last recovered tape. The voice, steady, deliberate, spoke like someone dictating a confession to time itself. The signal isn't about when they die. It's when the truth tries to call you back. You didn't answer before, detective. Will you answer now? The line went dead. Then a faint click. Then silence. Until a new sound began. The long, distant echo of a train horn. 4:52 a.m. Same time. Same haunting. That night, I sat at my desk staring at the evidence board. The lines, the names, the clocks. Haley. Lydia. Dalton. Derek. And now, a shadow I couldn't name. I wrote a single phrase beneath the case title. The signal was never one person. It was a network. The realization chilled me. It wasn't over. The murders weren't isolated. They were connected through time, ritual, maybe even purpose. Someone was orchestrating the pattern, and I just tuned in to their frequency. They call it closure when the case file gets sealed, when the lights go off in the evidence room, and you can finally go home knowing you did everything you could. But what if you didn't? What if the thing you buried wasn't the case, but the truth itself? That question started eating at me the night the tape stopped playing. After the dig site discovery, the crate, the tapes, the watch frozen at 4:52, the media descended on Pinebrook like vultures on fresh carrion. They called it the network case. For them, it was headline gold. For me, it was unfinished business. The watch wasn't just stopped. It was synced. Every recovered timestamp pointed to that same minute, 4:52. Different years. Different victims. Same signal. But whoever orchestrated it had erased their fingerprints long before we even started looking. The Bureau took over the investigation within days. I was thanked, dismissed, and politely escorted back to my department. Typical protocol when a small-town detective digs too deep. But I didn't stop. I kept a copy of the last audio, the one with Dalton's voice, the line that kept circling my mind. The signal isn't about when they die. It's when the truth tries to call you back. If the truth was calling back, I wasn't ready to hang up. 2 weeks later, an email landed in my inbox. No subject line. No sender. Just an attachment, a photo of a man standing outside the Riverbend station. Dated 3 days ago. It wasn't Derek Malone. It wasn't Dalton either. The face was older, sharper, but there was something familiar about the eyes. Almost like I'd seen them before, behind glass, in a courtroom, maybe. The photo's file name read, _452relay.jpg. I traced the IP to an internet relay node in Detroit, registered under a tech maintenance firm that didn't exist. Whoever sent the photo wanted me to follow the trail, carefully, but deliberately. So I did. I drove to Detroit, 6 hours of rain, static radio, and my own voice echoing in the silence of the car. I didn't tell anyone. Not my captain. Not the Bureau. Just packed the essentials, badge, recorder, gun, and Haley's photo, folded neatly inside my notebook. Because even if the case was over, I owed her the truth. The address from the company listing led me to an abandoned telecom exchange building. 3 stories of peeling paint, humming transformers, and flickering red lights that still blinked like ghosts of the machines that used to live there. Inside, cables hung from the ceiling like vines. Old servers hummed faintly, not dead, but asleep. I connected my field laptop to one of the still active nodes and ran a trace. The screen blinked once, then flooded with hundreds of audio logs, file names coded by timestamps, all starting at 4 hours and 52 minutes. The oldest dated back to 1998. This wasn't just one killer. This was a pattern that spanned decades. The recordings were wrong. Some were fragments of news broadcasts, others of anonymous voices confessing crimes. And a few, the ones that made my stomach twist, were of calls for help that never reached dispatch. They were all intercepted, saved, catalogued. Somebody, or something, had been collecting the sound of truth being ignored. And then, buried deep among the files, was one marked simply, Sara_Delgado.wav. My hands went still. I hit play. The voice was mine. From 3 years ago. A field recording I'd made during the Carter investigation. Me talking into my own recorder. If I'm wrong about this, I'll live with it. But if I'm right, someone else has been watching us all along. That's when it hit me. The network wasn't just about Derek, or Dalton, or even the victims. It was about documentation. Someone had been archiving every signal tied to 452, every voice, every recording, every failure. And somehow, I'd become part of it. As I dug deeper, the logs led to another IP, traced to a data center outside St. Louis. But before I could process the coordinates, my laptop froze. The cursor blinked once, twice, then lines of text scrolled across the screen. You're not supposed to hear this. You were supposed to stop at Pinebrook. We kept the signal alive so you would find it. Then the screen went black. I yanked the plug, but the sound that followed wasn't coming from the machine. It was coming from the old PA speakers on the wall. A low hum, growing louder. And beneath it, that same, distant train horn. 4:52. Again. I left Detroit that night. Drove until sunrise, until the static faded from the radio and my pulse matched the hum of the tires. Somewhere between the lines, I realized this wasn't a case anymore. It was an invitation. A message someone wanted me to decode, step by step, breadcrumb by breadcrumb. But I also knew this. Whoever built the network wasn't doing it for justice. They were doing it for control. Back home, Pinebrook felt different. The streets were quieter. The park was empty. Even the air carried a kind of static. I walked to Haley's memorial bench at dawn. The creek was calm, fog rolling in soft waves. And there, resting on the brass plaque, was another red carnation, just like before. But this one had a microchip taped to its stem. I took it back to the lab. The chip contained a single audio file, 14 seconds long. A man's voice, calm, steady, emotionless. The signal moves to those who listen. And detective, you've been listening too long. Then a faint click. Then nothing. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't go home. I stayed in the office, replaying the 14 seconds until the words lost meaning. Whoever he wasn't finished. And now, I was the next relay point. The next person in the chain. It's strange, realizing you've become part of the very thing you've been chasing. Stranger still, realizing that maybe, that was the point all along. There's a moment in every investigation when you stop asking who did it and start asking why it had to happen at all. That's where I was. Not chasing suspects anymore, chasing echoes. 4 weeks after Detroit, the case wouldn't leave me alone. I'd hear that faint hum at odd hours, behind the refrigerator, in the wiring of the street lamps, even in the silence between radio channels. The signal wasn't gone. It had just learned how to hide. 3 nights after the bureau locked me out, I woke to my phone buzzing once, just once, at exactly 4:52 a.m. No call log. No number. Just static. I recorded it out of habit. Played it back. Underneath the white noise, I heard something that didn't belong. 3 tones, a pause, then 3 more. It wasn't random. It was Morse code. I ran it through my old translator. The letters came out. LDS 4517. Coordinates, maybe. Or a code name. It didn't matter. It was movement. The case wasn't dead. It was calling me again. The reference led me to Lincoln Downstate Facility, a decommissioned emergency broadcast station up north, shut down in 2002, forgotten since. A half-day drive through back roads and fog that looked like ash in the headlights. When I got there, the fence was rusted, the sign half gone. Only the letters, N Downstate, were left, nailed crooked on a leaning post. Inside, the air smelled of copper and wet dust. The walls were covered in peeling safety posters, relay active, authorized personnel only. I followed a trail of faded cables through the corridors, every step echoing like I was walking through a throat that hadn't spoken in decades. At the end of the hallway was a single door, sealed from the inside, a red light above it faintly flickering. I knocked once. Static came through a wall speaker, followed by a voice, calm, low, and too familiar. Detective Delgado. You found it. The man inside looked like he'd been waiting years for that door to open. Grey hair. Weathered face. Engineer's hands. Steady. Deliberate. He introduced himself as Martin Keene, former communications engineer for the Early Warning Broadcast Network, the skeleton that became the 452 system. He didn't seem surprised to see me. He just gestured toward a dusty chair opposite his desk. I wondered how long it would take you to find me. Around him, old reel-to-reel machines spun slowly, their tapes looped through tangled spools like veins in a dying animal. The hum of electricity filled the space, steady and low, like the signal itself breathing through the walls. I built it, he said softly, but I never meant for it to become this. Keene poured me black coffee from a thermos, like this was just another morning. His story came in fragments, part confession, part theory, part warning. Back in the late 90s, the government had ordered him to create a relay grid that could capture and store failed emergency transmissions, calls that never reached dispatch, accidents, crimes, disasters, moments when communication broke down. He'd named the test node Project 452, after the average timestamp when distress calls peaked nationwide. We built a machine that could hear everything, he said. Every cry for help that didn't make it through. Every second between life and response. But then something started happening. The system began recording on its own, capturing signals that weren't routed through it. Keene's superiors shut it down, called it corruption. He called it something else. It evolved, he said. It started listening back. Keen led me to a control room buried under layers of dust and memory. Rows of analog monitors still glowed faintly. The wall clock, frozen at 4:52 a.m. He flipped a switch. The speakers hissed to life. At first, all I heard was static. Then, slowly, overlapping voices, faint, desperate, human. A child screaming. A woman sobbing. A dispatcher repeating, "Can you hear me?" Hundreds of moments caught between life and silence. The lost seconds the world forgot. These are the archives, Keen said quietly. Every case tied to that number. Every signal that failed to save someone. I felt my stomach tighten. Because among those voices, one stood out. Soft, shaking, terrified. Sara Delgado. It was Haley Carter's mother. A recording from my first case, a tape I'd taken years ago. It wasn't supposed to exist outside evidence lockup. I turned to Keen. He didn't flinch. The system doesn't steal, he said. It remembers. It pulls from every frequency ever connected to the signal. Even yours. He walked back to the console and lifted a headset, its padding cracked, the wire taped in 3 places. You want answers, he said. Put this on. But once you do, you'll never stop hearing it. I hesitated. The room felt alive, every machine humming in rhythm with my pulse. Some part of me knew this was the edge, the line between truth and madness. But cases like this don't end with logic. They end with obsession. So I took the headset. Silence at first. Then a low tone. Then thousands of layered whispers, overlapping, endless, untraceable. Please. Cries. Breath. And beneath it all, that rhythm again. 4 to 5. 2. Measured, constant, like a heartbeat that belonged to no one and everyone. Images flashed behind my eyelids, the creek where Haley died, the train yard, the network room in Detroit. Each moment collapsing into the next, stitched together by that same pulse of static. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. All that remained was one voice, clear, steady, human. Now you're part of it. I tore the headset off. Keen was gone. The reels still spun, empty, like they were finishing a story without its author. I walked out into the morning. The fog hung low, the trees silvered by dawn. Somewhere deep in the forest, a train horn sounded, distant but sharp. I checked my watch. 4:52. Back in Pinebrook, I didn't bother explaining. I turned in my badge. The department accepted it without question. They'd seen it before, the look that comes after staring too long into the dark. But the silence followed me home. Every night, it waited, inside wires, inside walls, inside me. 3 months later, the phone rang again. One ring. 4:52 a.m. static. Then 3 slow taps, a pause, 3 more. I played it backward this time. The translation spelled my name. Now I know what the signal really is. It's not a ghost or a machine. It's a reflection of everything we ignore, every plea unanswered, every moment too late. It's not calling for help. It's calling for witnesses. And somehow, I've become one of them. Maybe that's what Keen meant. That once you listen, you can't stop. Because once you've heard the silence, you recognize it everywhere. The 4:52 signal was never about death. It was about the space between the cry and the response, the second where humanity hesitates. That's where the truth lives. And that's where I'll keep listening. The sound fades, low static, train horn, heartbeat merging into silence. End of part 8, the voice behind the static. People expect the end of a case to feel like a finish line. It never does. Most days it feels like tracing power lines with your finger, wondering which pole will finally shock you. After Lincoln Down, I stopped pretending I could sleep. I drank cold coffee at 3 a.m., walked circles around my apartment, and waited for the signal, to ping, to breathe, to do anything at all. It stayed quiet, which somehow felt louder. I kept thinking about what Martin Keen said, the system doesn't steal. It remembers. If that was true, then somewhere out there was the first thing it ever remembered. The origin. The seed. The first recording. Find that and maybe you stop chasing shadows. I started with paperwork. FOIA requests, dusty inventories, dead emails. Most came back redacted or missing. A few returned blank, the bureaucratic version of a shrug. One address did hit, a county emergency operations archive in Morrill, 2 hours from Pinebrook. The custodian on the phone sounded surprised anyone cared. Basement stacks, he said. Kept the analog tapes after the digital migration. No one's asked for them in 20 years. He paused like he was counting grief in decades. Come by before 4. The lights go weird after that. I went the same day. The Morrill EOC looked like a school that never learned to be modern. Linoleum floors, grey walls, framed evacuation maps fading to yellow. The custodian, a thin man with a patched cardigan, led me down to the basement. The door stuck on humidity, then yawned open to a rectangle of stale air. Rows of shelves, each stacked with plastic cases labelled in old marker. Incident, 1998. Western Storm, 1999. Drill, Q3. The custodian left me with a rolling cart and a box of nitrile gloves. The room hummed with a low electrical buzz, the kind that feels like it's behind your teeth. My wristwatch, an old analog I trusted more than I should, ticked extra loud. I pulled the 1998 shelf. Found a box labelled July, Power Cascade. It held a microcassette in a cracked case, a form stapled to its sleeve, incident review, phone trunk overload, selective capture. Handwritten next to the printed header, someone had scrawled 452 in sharp, impatient pen. I lifted the tape and felt the old weight of it, the tug of memory that isn't yours and never will be. The basement had one working player, bolted to a desk like they were afraid truth might run away if it wasn't secured. I pressed play. Static first. Then the clutter of switchboard sounds, the breath of a room working too hard. Voices overlap, one dispatcher, then a second. A storm siren wails in the distance. In the foreground, a young woman's voice, thin with panic, but steady in a way that makes you want to be brave with her. Hello. I'm on River Road. The water's rising. My car, I can't get the door open. A dispatcher answers with training in her tone, a script carrying her like a raft. What's your name? Is anyone with you? Lydia. A beat of breath. Just me. The line clicks. Another dispatcher speaks over the first, something about lines down, about rerouting, about a patch to state police. Someone asks if the bridge is still open. Someone else swears under their breath. The girl again, closer to the MIC somehow, as if fear teaches ingenuity. There's a light through the trees. Hold on, I hear a train. Are there tracks down there? Shuffling. A chair scrapes the floor. A voice, tight, authoritative, male, says, prioritize the nursing home. River Road can wait. No one answers for 3 seconds that land with the weight of an anvil. Then, from the girl, please, I don't want to die here. The tape hiccups. A relay tone bleats in the background. The dispatcher, the first one, the calm one, comes back, voice too bright. Lydia, keep talking to me. Are you near the tree line? I'm sending. The tape cuts. The counter on the player clicks from 451 to 452. Silence. A brief warble. End of recording. I rewound. Played it again. Listened to the mechanics. The capture point wasn't an official record. It was a spill, a moment when the system overheated and bled into the backup line. A bleed that timed out right as the minute turned. 4:52. It wasn't the first tragedy in the archive, but it was the first time the timer aligned with that minute and the recorder obeyed the failure instead of the command. Not a ghost. A mechanism. A rule being born. I sat there until the custodian coughed upstairs, a polite way to say time was up. Before I left, I checked the incident form. Dispatcher names were blacked out, but there was a signature at the bottom. E. Marsh, shift supervisor. I wrote it down. It took a day to find her. Eleanor Marsh, retired, living in a single-story home outside Morrill, a bird feeder swinging in the breeze like it was the only metronome left in the world. She answered the door with careful eyes and let me in without asking for ID. She'd been around cops long enough to recognize one, badge or not. I told her what I'd heard. Didn't push. Let the quiet move around the room until it decided to sit down. She brought out a showbox of clipped articles, union newsletters, photos of people in headsets smiling while fluorescent lights tried to make them look alive. It was the flood, she said, adjusting her glasses. Transformer popped at 4:47. We were on backup lines. Patching calls the old way, hand over hand. She mimed the motion, a muscle memory refusing to surrender. We lost her when the patch tripped. We lost a lot that summer. Lydia, I said. She nodded like I'd said a prayer. We never got the last name. The sheriff insisted the bridge was the priority. I filed a grievance. They filed it in a drawer. A small, humorless smile. That's where truth goes when it isn't useful. Did you know the tape captured the drop? I asked. We were told the recorder failed. She looked at me then, sharper. It didn't fail, did it? I told her what Keane told me. About a system that started remembering failures. About an average minute that turned into a metronome for regret. Eleanor's gaze went to the window. A finch flared yellow and vanished. I still wake up at that time, she said. 4:52, like a hand on the shoulder, heavy enough to leave a mark you can't see. I asked about the voice on the tape, the male one. Prioritize the nursing home. She exhaled like she'd been holding a decade in her lungs. Victor Ames, County Emergency Director. He ordered the patch. We were supposed to triage outside protocol. He called it leadership. A pause. He called it necessary. She stood, took a folder from a shelf, slid a photo toward me. A younger man in a suit, a mouth that smiled without ever letting the eyes join. He left for the state office the next spring. Promotions love a clean story. Where is he now? Consulting. Teaches crisis management to people who like buzzwords. She wrote down a number. Not his current one, his public one. The real ones don't go in directories. At the door, Eleanor pressed something into my hand. A brass key tag stamped LD, 98, Box 3. Found it in a drawer after I retired. The county got rid of the boxes, but I kept the tag. She didn't say because I knew someone would come. She didn't have to. Box 3 turned out to be a storage locker at Shelby Depot, a facility behind a self-serve car wash on a road that ended at nothing. Inside, 4 bankers' boxes labeled with tape and a supervisor handwriting I recognized from the moral form. I opened the first box, and the smell hit, the sweet, paper rot scent of years clinging to ink. In the third folder, under meeting minutes and budget requests, was a single-page memo, interim policy, prioritize group facilities during infrastructure compromise. Effective immediately. Signed V. Ames. Timestamped 4:52 a.m., July 14th, 1998. The origin wasn't mystical. It wasn't cursed. It was policy. A line someone drew in a room where voices don't echo. The minute wasn't about fate. It was about habit. A time when triage turned into a rule, when a delay turned into a doctrine, when one decision became a metronome. The network didn't invent 4:52. We did. I copied the memo. Photographed every page. Called the number Eleanor gave me. It rang to a voicemail with a friendly greeting and a calendar link. I hung up before the tone. Outside, the sky had started its evening fade, that grey-blue wash that makes towns like Morrill look like a photograph tacked inside a frame. My phone buzzed once, a text from an unknown number. You're getting warm. Below it, a location pin. Ames Civic Center, Auditorium B tomorrow. 7 p.m. A training. Crisis leadership. Of course. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I didn't print tickets. I wore a plain black jacket and a face that said I belonged anywhere. The thing about silence is it changes shape when you chase it long enough. At first it's emptiness. Then it becomes pattern. And if you keep listening past that, it starts to sound a lot like truth. That's what I was thinking as I followed the message down the stairwell beneath the Civic Center. The steps were concrete, slick with condensation. Each one groaned like it hadn't been stepped on in years. My flashlight trembled across rusted pipes and peeling walls. Somewhere below, a soft hum pulsed in sync with my heartbeat. 4:51. The basement opened into a narrow maintenance corridor, low ceiling, damp air, the smell of oil and cold metal. A string of emergency lights blinked unevenly, red halos cutting through the dark. I moved slow, careful. No gun drawn, just instinct. You don't point a weapon at a frequency. The hum got louder. Then came the click, faint, mechanical, rhythmic. The relay. At the far end of the corridor, a door stood half open, a faint light bleeding through. Someone had been there recently, and left the power on. Inside, the walls were lined with cables, tangled and alive. running into an old broadcast console glowing pale green. The same interface I'd seen in Detroit and Lincoln Down. Only this one was newer, cleaner, maintained. And sitting in front of it, calmly typing into an old monitor, was Victor Ames. He didn't flinch when I stepped inside. Didn't even look surprised. He just turned slightly in his chair, as if he'd been expecting me for years. "Detective Delgado," he said. "Right on time." His voice was smooth, public, practiced. The kind that could make policy sound like salvation. On the console behind him, waveforms flickered in steady rhythm, pulsing every few seconds. 4 hours and 52 minutes, 4 hours and 52 minutes, 4 hours and 52 minutes. "You shouldn't be here," he said, not unkindly. "But I suppose the signal wanted you to be." I told him I'd heard the tapes. The archives. The girl in the flood. I told him I'd seen his signature, the memo, the timestamp, the order that started it all. He smiled faintly. We had to choose. The bridge or the nursing home. That minute saved more lives than it lost. Then why hide it? I asked. Why let a system grow around it like a virus? Ames turned back to the monitors, typing slowly. Because it worked. The signal predicted failure. It catalogued human error, turned it into data. You think the Bureau shut it down? No. They privatized it. Sold it as predictive emergency analytics. We just renamed the silence. He paused, then looked at me fully for the first time. You, detective, you're the only variable it couldn't quantify. He gestured at the screens. Each one showed different feeds, maps, incident logs, weather alerts, social graphs, blinking dots where people had dialed for help. Across the top of every feed, a timer ticked down. 4 hours 51 minutes and 20 seconds, 4 hours 51 minutes and 45 seconds, 4 hours 51 minutes and 59 seconds, 4 hours and 52 minutes. It's self-learning, Ames said quietly. The algorithm tracks when we fail to respond, every unreturned call, every delayed dispatch. It marks the moment action dies. That's the heartbeat you've been chasing. He leaned forward, pressing a key. The room filled with sound, the low, layered hum of hundreds of overlapping voices, just like before. Except now, the sound was organized. Ordered. The chaos had become a choir. This is the new network, he said. Version 3.1. It doesn't just remember, it anticipates. I could feel it vibrating in my ribs. The speakers weren't just playing sound. They were transmitting patterns, tiny, structured bursts, ones the human ear almost missed but the nervous system didn't. Why me? I asked. He smiled again, soft but tired. Because you kept listening after everyone else stopped. The signal recognized that. It needed a voice that believed silence had meaning. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small black drive, setting it on the desk between us. This contains the core dataset, every 452 event recorded since 1998. All the failures. All the grief. You could expose it, leak it, destroy it. But you won't. Because you understand what happens when people stop listening. The hum rose again, faint but insistent. Something about it made the lights pulse in rhythm, once every second. 4, 5, 2. If I shut this down, I said, what happens? He tilted his head. The same thing that happens when you stop a heartbeat. The silence wins. That's when I noticed the clock on the wall, not digital this time, but old, mechanical. Its hands were ticking forward, toward 4:52. The second hand hit the mark. Every monitor froze. Every waveform aligned. And then, the relay snapped. Static flooded the room. The lights dimmed. And from the speakers came a single voice, calm, female, mechanical. Sequence complete. Archive integrity verified. Ames stood. You see, it never needed us. It just used us to record itself. The sound built, thickening into pressure. The floor vibrated. The console lights began blinking faster, transferring something. Uploading. I yanked the drive from the table, pulling cords as alarms erupted through the building. Ames didn't move. He just watched, almost serene. You can't stop a signal, detective, he said. You can only change who hears it next. I turned toward the door. A sudden surge of light, white, electric, searing, filled the room. Then silence. I woke up outside. Concrete dust on my coat. The civic center behind me burned faintly, windows shattered, smoke curling upward in soft grey spirals. No one else was there. No alarms. No sirens. Just the early sound of morning birds, small, oblivious. The black drive was still in my hand, warm and humming faintly. I looked at my watch. 4:52 a.m. I drove until sunrise, through empty highways and endless static on the radio. At mile marker 217, the hum returned. Not from the speakers, from the drive. It pulsed once, twice, then a voice. My voice. This is Detective Sara Delgado. If you're hearing this, the signal has moved. It's listening now, through us. The transmission repeated, looping softly. Not recorded. Live. That's when I realized what Keane had meant all along. The network wasn't technology. It was contagion. Every investigator who listened, every officer who filed a report, every witness who remembered. We'd all become part of the relay. It wasn't a system anymore. It was human memory, networked, breathing, endless. By the time I reached Pinebrook, the sun was up. The air felt cleaner than it had in years. But the silence was still there, hiding behind birdsong, traffic, morning talk radio. I parked by the creek, the one where it all began. The water moved slow, catching the light. I placed the black drive in the stream and watched it drift until it sank beneath the ripples. Then I took my recorder from my coat and hit record. It's 4:52 a.m. If you've been listening to me this whole time, thank you. I don't know what the signal is anymore, a warning, a mirror, or maybe just a heartbeat that refuses to stop. But I do know this. Every silence hides a story. And as long as I can hear it, I'll keep telling it. The recorder clicked off. For a moment, the world was completely still. Then, faintly, from somewhere unseen, a low train horn cut through the mist, soft, distant, familiar. It sounded almost like someone saying goodbye. The 4:52 signal. Not an ending. Not a case. Just a frequency that waits for anyone willing to listen. Static fades. Black screen. End of part 10. The frequency of truth.